Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. We do have a very interesting stream today, one that I didn't know that I would have so much information about, like further away iPhones, right? I thought we would be kind of getting into the territory where we would have some really final confirmation on like the iPhone 16 series, but today we're thinking iPhone 17, iPhone foldables in 2026, and we don't quite know when the iPhone SE4 is slated for releasing, but that will also be featured in this video. So I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode with Mark Tech. As always, I encourage you to subscribe, like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it, and of course, comment on it. I always say I love me a lively live chat, and definitely this is the kind of topic where I think there can be a lot of agreements and disagreements with. Definitely, this is a more provocative video with a title like saying that those iPhone models are stupid. We already have a viewer asking, like, saying she thinks that iPhones in generally are good. And yes, the commentary here is about presumptive rumored iPhone models. So Angelica, who is also like a Mark Tech Pro Max tier subscriber here on YouTube, thank you so much for asking. In general, yes, I agree, but not in this particular case. But also, those are not real iPhones, quote unquote, for now. And speaking of subscribing on YouTube, you of course can become a channel member. So beyond subscribing, you can also choose to support this channel directly. Shout out goes again to Angelica and Maximus, who are our Mark Tech Pro Max tier followers there. And of course, you can go to my Patreon, support me over there as well. Links are in the description of this channel. Shout out goes to Louis Gold, who is a Mark Tech Pro Max tier supporter on Patreon. And without further ado, at first, cheers as always. I'm thirsty as hell. It's extremely humid here, so I'll try to get some liquid into me that isn't rain. So, what do we have to discuss today? Well, it seems to have been building up now for quite a little bit. The question of what will Apple do once they get rid of the iPhone Plus, right? The iPhone Plus right now is the worst selling model. It sort of replaced the Mini in that bad spot. It doesn't really make sense for most people because it's only $100 cheaper than the Pro. Granted, it's kind of a lot cheaper than the Pro Max, but the Pro Max is then also a lot better, especially once you consider features such as ProMotion, things like that. So there have been questions. What will Apple do? Well, for a while, we've talked about the potential of an iPhone Ultra, either an even more premium Pro Max, right? But basically a replacement for the Pro Max, right? Maybe a $100 higher starting point. I don't know, maybe one extra camera feature over the regular Pro or something like that. And then Apple basically rebrands Pro Max to Ultra, or an Ultra that would sit on top of a Pro Max. So that would be a way to keep Pro prices relatively manageable, but then the Ultra, because of its incredibly special position in the lineup, could be like something crazy, 1,500, $1,600 or whatever. Now, it seems like we sort of aren't getting either. If you think about the iPad or the MacBook lineup, the most direct comparison I would have would be something like the MacBook Air. And I don't even mean the MacBook Air as it currently exists in the MacBook lineup. I'm thinking MacBook Air when it was originally introduced, and where its thinness, lightness, and use of forward-looking technologies like very expensive SSDs made it actually more expensive than the coexisting Pro lineup, right? That's very important. People forget very easily that before Apple hit that magical $999 price point for the MacBook Air, they were pricing them at like $1,700 with abysmal amounts of storage, because SSDs at that time were very rare. Apple didn't know if that lineup was even able to succeed, so they basically ran ramped up the prices like crazy on there. And it seems like some of that is happening with the iPhone 17, more specifically with a subsection of the 17 series, which we for now are calling the iPhone 17 Slim. So, and that is the first phone today that I am calling stupid. Now, of course, we do know about the upcoming iPhone 16 series for 2024, consisting of 4 models: an iPhone 16, 16 Plus, 16 Pro, 16 Pro Max. Again, for a while, it was rumored that maybe the move to a 6.9-inch display would warrant the Pro Max be rebranded to Ultra. For now, there's no confirmation of that happening. However, for the 17 family, of course, as I outlined before, is that Apple would introduce a new Slim. Now, I do want to preface this with saying that this does not come from like the best source ever, but it does line up a little bit with something Mark Gurman had already shared. So this is why I'm actually reporting on this. Again, I'm not a reporter, not a journalist. I don't have any primary sources, but I am basically regurgitating. Sometimes I regurgitate regurgitations of regurgitations. I have to fully admit that. But this is something that is worth discussing because nothing right now is set in stone. Even though sometimes designs and even finished products can be ready quite in advance of the actual launch, I fully believe that we as consumers right now have the power to tell Apple to F off with something like that, especially if some of the details here turn out to be correct. So, like, I know I sound more frustrated and hypercritical, and maybe that's wrong. I don't know. Maybe Apple has something up their sleeves that I didn't think of, or simply isn't yet mentioned in the rumors. But I do want to say that for now, the iPhone 17 Slim sounds stupid to me. And we are calling it Slim. It's basically a colloquial term. I do believe that if Apple introduces it will not be called that. Most likely, it would be getting something like the Air branding, or even more, well, actually, more likely than that, would be something specific to iPhone, because Air is usually sitting below Pro. And given what we are seeing with these rumors, that branding just wouldn't make sense given what we are used to on iPads and Macs. So, Apple has been on a thinning craze, apparently. Supposedly, according to rumors, the fact that the iPad Pro with the M4 chip did not just become thinner because, well, Apple could make it thinner, but because it's a part of a broader like redesign strategy across Apple. They want to make iPhones thinner, Macs thinner, and of course the iPad here was the first thing to go that way. Now I do have counter arguments to that, and if somebody wants to basically come in the chat and present their own arguments, I'm all for that. Let me start with my own. I think the fact that the M4 iPad Pro got a lot thinner has a lot to do with the fact that it made a major change in display technology. A change that on the iPhone cannot be perfectly replicated because the iPhone is already OLED, so moving to tandem OLED might make it slightly thinner, but definitely not in the way the iPad is. And then iPad also made the jump from 5 nanometer to second generation 3 nanometer. Again, the iPhone cannot do that kind of jump because the iPhone already has a 3 nanometer chip, and the iPhone that actually got a 3 nanometer chip, which is the iPhone 15 Pro series, that one was actually pretty thick. So Apple did not use that opportunity to jump to a much thinner form factor. So if that redesigning focus of Apple's is actually correct, it has definitely not taken shape yet on iPhone, and Apple has not utilized the advantages of newer technology on iPhone that they have now used on iPad, even though the technology already exists. Tandem OLED is better than regular OLED, but it's not that much better that the iPhone couldn't at least replicate some of that. Second generation 3 nanometer is better than M3B, but it's also not miles apart to what the iPhone already uses. So this idea that the iPad got thinner because Apple really wanted it to. No, I think the iPad got primarily thinner because Apple could, and because on the iPad that was always the focus. On the iPhone, I would argue less so. But that's neither here nor there. That's just a very recent example, and just why I argue against this idea of an iPhone Slim. But let's continue. Um, it's also notable that we don't yet know specific measurements, like we don't have leaked CAD files for this iPhone or anything. It's very, very unlikely that it would be anything close to those 5 millimeters that the iPad Pro hit. I know some people have been mentioning like around 6 millimeters or something like that, but the honest truth is that we don't know. And also on the iPhone, you have to consider that device thickness does not match like overall thickness, like especially for the camera bump. If Apple wants to keep the same kind of cameras, that will make that camera bump even more ridiculous than it ever was. Daniel Gomes, welcome to the chat. You're watching my video on the park. Well, that's cool. If you're enjoying your free time and you're watching me, that's I'm also, by the way, I'm friendly for work. Is it called right? Podcast. So if you're watching this, I'm not cursing too much. I'm not using sexually suggestive language or anything like that. So if you also want to put me on speaker, I doubt that I would embarrass you very much. So yeah, thank you, man, for watching. I don't think I've read your name ever in the chat. So I always love having new people interact with us. So thank you for joining. And now there comes the details. And those details to me are incredibly weird. This is why I have to take a sip, because this will now turn into a long tirade. And that is that the iPhone 17 Slim is supposedly sitting between the Pro and the Pro Max version, right? The upcoming Pro and Pro Max will have 6.3 and 6.9 inch screens respectively. This supposedly will be either 6.55 or 6.65 inches. Now, at 6.65, it's very likely that it would be called a 6.7 inch display, at which point it would match the base iPhone 17. Well, if there was an iPhone 17 Plus, it would match it, but it would basically match the iPhone 16 Plus before it, and then, of course, every Max iPhone before that, well, somewhat recent Max iPhone before that, and Plus iPhones before that, because those were all 6.7 inches. After wait, when did Apple increase it to 6.7 inches? Because the iPhone XS Max was 6.5 inches. Was it on the iPhone 12? I actually don't remember. It's all starting to blend in my head. I can actually look at it. First iPhone with 6.7 inch display. So that's a learning. The iPhone 14 introduced that size. First seen. Oh, yeah. So it was the iPhone 12. Yeah, that makes sense, because with the newer, thinner bezels and the newer flat form factor, basically. Yeah, that makes sense. That would introduce, because my 13 Pro Max was already 6.7 inches, so that makes perfect sense. I was stupid there, guys. So let us get back to what we have here. But we also have rumors that make it slightly smaller at 6.55 inches. Apple would most likely brand it as a 6.5 inch display, similar to what we had for the Max models prior to the iPhone 12 Pro Max. It's weird though, man, because why would you do that? Why would you go away from something that you already have developer support for, like a specific display size and resolution? Like, I understand there's like a question with like a 6.7 inches. Well, there is now also 6.9 inches on the Pro Max. But why would you go smaller than what you already had on the previous Plus models? That to me is absolutely unclear. everything to me suggests that this is a prototype device that Apple is currently trying to figure out internally. So I don't know if this will ever launch, but for me, this is the first part about it that just makes basically no sense. Daniel, you're saying those rumors do not make much sense. It's likely clickbait. You're saying it. You hope it gets 12 gigs of RAM. We'll get to that. Just for the 12 gigabyte, they wouldn't need to do anything. Well, yeah, I know that a lot of like enthusiasts will like buy the 17 Pro series for 12 gigs of RAM. I know that a lot of like semi enthusiasts will probably go with the iPhone. Uh, 17 also, like the smaller version, because this will be like the cheapest promotion iPhone ever. So there will be a lot of value actually in the 17 series. This is why I don't understand why Apple would create this weird middle, like neglected stepchild that's just so weird. And we have a couple of more people watching. I do want to encourage you guys, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out, comment. I do love engaging with a live chat. If you want to just leave a message, very likely I will respond. If you want to leave a message that I will 100% respond, you can send it in the form of a super chat. And if you want to support this channel directly in other ways, there are channel memberships here on YouTube, and there's my Patreon account. Then there's the question of material, and now this is where we also get into a very weird territory, because supposedly the iPhone 17 Slim, in an attempt to be lighter, right? Because it's, well, we are calling it slim, but its focus is most likely not just being slim, but also being light. And aluminum is lighter than titanium. Now, it is less durable, so technically you could use a lot more aluminum to replicate the durability that you can have with a lot less titanium. But if you don't care too much about like durability, you can still make a decent chassis with aluminum. Aluminum has other benefits like heat dissipation and radio frequency transparency. Quite in general, aluminum is probably a better material for smartphones in general than titanium. Definitely better than stainless steel ever was, but we do like our premium materials on our Pro and higher end models. So, and right now you're thinking, well, it has a smaller display, right, than the Pro Max or the Ultra or whatever. It has an aluminum chassis, not titanium, so it's definitely below the Pro models. Now, those things could make perfect sense for an iPhone 17 Plus, right? An iPhone 17 Plus that might be, oh, we wanted to make it cheaper, right? Or we did not want to increase prices, so despite inflation, so we cut a little bit on the display size. We are, of course, keeping an aluminum chassis. We are not moving to titanium on our cheaper models or whatever. That makes perfect sense. And maybe some technologies could come to the iPhone 17 Plus that would be newer than some tech in the Pros. That sometimes happen. Technically, on the iPhone 15, the base model, the sensor inside is actually somewhat newer, one might say, than on the Pro and Pro Max models. It's just a much smaller sensor, right? Or it's smaller. So the fact that it technically is slightly more light sensitive doesn't really come much into effect, because, well, better sensor is still better, right? And that bigger sensor is still better. And sometimes we have things like the iPhone 14 introduced a new internal redesign that was much easier to repair. The iPhone 14 Pro series did not have those changes. They only came to the Pro family on the iPhone 15 series. So the iPhone 17 Plus maybe getting rebranded into 17 Slim would make sense to me, even if it gets some new technologies. For example, one thing that is rumored is a relocated camera. if you, of course, as of course you guys know, the iPhone has its cameras on the side in that, I believe Drew from Tylosive Tech calls it like stove rearrangement, where you can like very distinctly see the cameras next to each other, and then of course in that triangle shape. Well, the iPhone 17 series, well, supposedly the slim, I don't know how like all inclusive that rumor is for every iPhone 17 model, but I've read that specifically about the 17 slim is that it would have like a visor design similar to what the Pixel devices, well, kind of used to have. The Pixel 9 Pro Fold will get rid of that, but then the Pixel 9 Pro will still kind of have it. So it's a bit of a mess with the redesigns on the Pixel front. Oh my god, guys, it's getting so humid. I apologize for sweating, but I cannot open my window or else there's a construction right across the street. We'll die from the sound. So instead, I'm choosing to just die from the humidity for you guys. I'm like humidity Jesus right now. I'm dying for your enjoyment. Um, so the iPhone 17, let's talk specifically about the 17 Slim in this case, would have a redesigned camera arrangement where the cameras would just be from left to right next to each other. And supposedly that would also come with a redesigned motherboard where, of course, those cameras connect to. Again, you can take it with a grain of salt. This is just the rumor here. But now we are talking. Well, now the iPhone 17 Plus, it would make sense to us, right? Okay, Apple introduces a new camera design first on the base iPhone. Maybe it also works better because it's only 2 cameras, right? So it's not 3 cameras. So Apple wouldn't have to redesign the motherboard too much to extend too much to the right-hand side or whatever. But now there comes the worst part, and that is the supposed price. And this is where it stops making any sense to me because, well, now we have a family of the iPhone 17, right, which would supposedly still be $799, a 17 Pro, which would be either $999 or $1099. It depends on if Apple bumps up its base price, similar to what they did on the 15 Pro Max. And then the 17 Pro Max would be, I don't know, $1199 or $1299, depending on if Apple increases prices further. And supposedly that iPhone 17 Slim would be treated like a high-end model that sits on top of the 17 Pro Max. And we don't know if it would have more or better cameras or anything like that. And that, to me, the fact that it could even match the price of the Pro Max is ridiculous. But I've heard people say like, oh, it would start at like $1299. And I don't know if I'm the only one to whom that sounds completely ridiculous. You can let me know if I might be going insane and it makes perfect sense to you. But the way it doesn't make sense to me is that when the MacBook Air for a short period of time was more expensive than the MacBook Pro was because its most standout feature, its thin and lightness, was enabled by its use of SSD storage. And Apple had even specific deals with Intel for like the smallest Intel Core Duo chips they could get, things like that. I believe they like even encouraged Intel to like jump to a new node more quickly so they can get a smaller, more efficient chip and everything else like that. But those were like luxury features in a way, and they were enjoyable to people who were looking at netbooks at the time but thinking, oh, those are way too slow, they have crappy screens, they have crappy build quality, why would I ever get that? And that's kind of what Apple aimed the MacBook Air for, which is like, this is like the premium, most premium netbook you will ever have. Netbooks are crap, get a MacBook Air. And then eventually they brought the price of the MacBook Air significantly down. What here tells you that this is a pro or this is a premium model that has any kind of revolutionary technology that would warrant a higher price than the Pro Max? Yeah, Daniel, you're absolutely right. Imagine Apple like delivering worse specs, but at a higher price, just to make it thinner. And again, that can work on a device that's specifically like too large for many people, because you have to imagine that there was a time when this was like a relatively good thickness, and that's not what she said, but that's for what's for MacBooks, right? So when the MacBook Air introduced a significantly thinner form factor, it made sense to people why you would sacrifice some features, maybe like good cooling, and why you would pay extra, because now you have an SSD inside that doesn't spin up like a hard drive, is significantly smaller. Apple even put the chiplets for the storage directly on the motherboard, so they didn't even put it in like an SSD container, like a 2.5-inch drive or whatever. Or even like an NVMe drive, which at that point, granted, didn't exist. So this idea that Apple could be asking more money here, because you have to understand, what does slim mean? Well, even if Apple introduces a revolutionary technology inside there for batteries, right? This thing ain't getting a larger battery than the Pro Max. Think of screens. Now, this is another part of the rumors for the iPhone 17 family, and that is that each and all of them are moving to LTPO screens. LTPO, of course, being more efficient and more advanced than LTPS, but also and therefore enabling ProMotion, which is variable refresh rate. And for Apple, there is no high refresh rate without variable refresh rate, because of battery life, because of how content can scale with variable refresh rate. That's all nice and good. And for the 17 model, that means, oh, you now get an LTPO screen for much cheaper than $1,000 or $1,100. But now for the Slim, of course it would need to have an LTPO screen. That's like the bare minimum. In fact, if it is more expensive, I would kind of ask for it to have some revolutionary technology, right? And we talked about like better anti-reflection stuff. Again, this will not drive the price enough to justify a slim model to be more expensive than the Pro Max. Like more durable Gorilla Glass. Again, we've been getting durable Gorilla Glass and then ceramic shield for years and years now. None of that drives pricing up enough to actually like create a new form factor. One thing that could, in my opinion, make a phone significantly thinner but also more expensive to build would be micro LED. Micro LED is kind of like this. It's not a successor to OLED in the technological sense, but kind of from a consumer perspective, this should be the next technology. It is even more efficient than OLED. It doesn't have its downsides when it comes to poor longevity and like burn-in risk, things like that. It should be getting even brighter. It might even have even faster response times than the already pretty instantaneous OLED. But this is not rumored. There are no production like lineups being created that would service like tens of millions of units that Apple would be probably aiming to sell of this device. So all the other stuff here, like durability, anti-reflectivity, and of course LTPO, none of that warrants a higher price than the already existing Pro and Pro Max models. Again, those are technologies that would be very nice to ship into a cheaper form factor like a Plus model, because right now the base model and the Plus do not have LTPO, do not have ProMotion, do not have variable refresh rate. But at a higher price point, none of that is like game changing, because we had ProMotion ever since the 13 Pro series. And once you account for inflation, those things are dirt cheap at this point. Daniel, you're saying you think those rumors are for 18 series. Well, some of that is like I would argue that a lot of the individual things, like, a new ceramic shield coating and whatever, it's actually hard to predict for which specific model they are, right? Sometimes leakers like Mark Gurman actually speak to people, right? Like engineers and whatever, and even like maybe slightly higher ups, right? Middle managers, whatever. And they tell you, well, we have kind of this date in mind, but that can easily shift into either direction. So I just like to bring up everything that is here, even if some of it is technically for the iPhone 18. I just don't. The problem is also the way it's all been like jammed together. And this is not a jab at Mac rumors. This is just the way the 17 Slim has been talked about in general by basically everyone. It's very difficult to discombobulate where it might be. Where I've also heard some people say maybe it would only launch with the iPhone 18 family, right? So it's actually hard to say if we should just call it like iPhone Slim. Like the way I called the iPhone Flip, for example, I didn't call it the iPhone 17 Flip. I didn't call it like the iPhone 18 Flip, right? I just called it iPhone Flip because if Apple ever introduces a foldable, for one, I don't think they will just push the number of the regular iPhone into that device. But I also don't think that we quite know in which year the Flip will launch, even though, for example, we do have a rumor that it would be a 2026 model. It could easily move to 2027, right? And at that point, it's not an iPhone 18 model, it's an iPhone 19 model. So that's why I just called it iPhone Flip in my title. For the 17 Slim, I called it, yes, 17 Slim, but I could have also called it iPhone 17 Air, or I could have called it iPhone Air or iPhone Slim in general. So yeah, just so you guys have some context, I sometimes, of course, have to give names to products that are just rumored, that are non-existent, and sometimes might never exist in reality. But I do so because when I obviously want to talk about it, I do have to name it something. I cannot say rumored iPhone that is slightly thinner, lighter, but also more expensive every time when I talk about it. I do have to create a shorthand, like calling it Slim, Air, 17 Slim, 17 Air, or whatever. Now, for the problem is that this is basically what we know of the 17 series, of the 17 Slim, right? We do know more about the general iPhone 17 family. Like we do know that it will introduce a better periscope camera that might go beyond 5x optical zoom. It will likely have a better selfie cam with a larger sensor. That zoom camera on the back would also move to a 48 megapixel camera. So even if it stays at 5x optical zoom, that could still give you like an easy 2x digital zoom on top that is still relatively high quality. Then there is the rumor of faster chips. And this is where there are very, very contradictory rumors, because TSMC on its roadmap has N3P and 2 nanometers simultaneously labeled for 2025. That being said, the latest rumor points to the A19 chip being an N3P chip. I myself have already said that I bet 100. I don't remember if I bet $150 or $100 on that Apple will introduce at least one 2 nanometer chip and therefore a 2 nanometer device in 2025. I think it's very likely that the 17 Pros would get a 2 nanometer chip. Supposedly, the rumors we are talking about when it comes to 17 Slim would be it having the A19 chip that is on N3P. Now, it should be said that we have no idea here, because again, it's very, very contradictory because one thing that we've been talking about for a while is RAM increases for the 17 Pro. And that makes sense with how Apple keeps like the same amount of RAM for 2 or 3 years and then upgrades it first on the Pro models, then eventually bringing that same RAM amount to the cheaper models. And then after another 2 or 3 years, they give the Pro models again more RAM, and so on. It starts and over and over and over, right? The 15 Pro Max has 8 gigs of RAM. The iPhone 15 has 6 gigs of RAM. The iPhone 16 will get likely the same 8 gigs of RAM as the 15 Pro and the 16 Pro, and then the 17 Pro would jump to 12 gigabytes of RAM. And in fact, Daniel, as you said in our chat before, is that some people would likely update just for the higher amount of RAM. Supposedly, that will help with things like Apple Intelligence, and just in general, more demanding apps, games, things like that, or just your system deleting less stuff that you've opened up a week ago. But in that way, it would make sense for the regular iPhone 17 to still keep 8 gigs of RAM. Now, we of course wouldn't complain about that too much because it's a cheaper model. But where would we end up with the Slim? And supposedly, the Slim would still max out at 8 gigs of RAM. And that to me makes no sense again because it is the more expensive model. At least it's rumored to be the more expensive model. However, and this is probably my last thing here, is that the fact that it's rumored to be more expensive does not actually mean it is going to be. If Apple introduces a model like that, they could make it, for example, more expensive than the Plus used to be, right? If we assume that the base iPhone 17 could launch still at $799, maybe an iPhone 17 Slim would be like a Plus, but at $999, and maybe at that point it starts with 256 gigabytes of storage. It would basically either match or slightly undercut the price of the regular 17 Pro. It would have like one fewer camera, less RAM, things like that. Maybe a one generation older LTPO screen, maybe one based on M12 materials from Samsung rather than M14 that will be introduced on the 16 Pro. That could all make sense. What wouldn't make sense is the potential that it would be over the price of the Pro Max, which right now starts at $1199. To me, this is the thing where it breaks apart because Apple making a slimmer Plus makes sense to me, right? It could be like a unique advantage for Apple saying, oh, we have like the thinnest and lightest plus sized device. It has a new motherboard specifically for stuff like that. But why would it ever cost more than the Pros with the things that we are rumored to get here? Like, especially an objective thing like RAM, right? Apple likes to cheap out on RAM. We all know that. But in what world would it make sense for a more expensive device to get less RAM? Now, again, I don't want to belabor this point over and over again. I made it pretty clear why I think the 17 Slim would be stupid, and primarily that comes down to price. The actual idea of an iPhone that just like focuses on slimness and whatever, as long as it has decent battery life, decent performance, whatever, it doesn't really hurt me. What would hurt me, because I believe it would be a colossal waste of Apple engineer time, is an iPhone foldable in the form factor of the Galaxy Z Flip. This is my issue here. I don't mind Apple working on a foldable. And for one, we do know that Apple has been working on foldables for literally years because everyone works on everything. And the richer you are as a company, the more likely you are to work on everything simultaneously. Apple, I believe, has prototypes of almost every technology imaginable. as long as it's at least somewhat feasible. And I'm sure they even have prototypes that would be in no way feasible in the next 5 years, but they still get like their engineers ready for maybe some kind of breakthrough in logistics for a specific technology. That's all fine and good. What doesn't make sense to me is, why do we need to get another flip? Let me take a sip. So, an iPhone foldable, and yes, my eye is twitching, is supposedly coming in 2026. Now, stop me if you've heard iPhone foldable is coming in the next 2 years before, 5 times at this point. Ever since the introduction of the original Galaxy Fold, it's been rumored that Apple will have a foldable iPhone in the next 2 to 3 years, and then those 2 to 3 years pass, and we get new rumors about an iPhone and foldable in 2 to 3 years. So this rumor has been pushed for years by 2 to 3 years by now. So if it's actually coming in 2026, I couldn't tell you. I would say already that giving it a date is already presumptuous, and I don't like that. This is also coming from, I believe, uh, uh, I believe Rene Ritchie used to call them randomly accurate in digitimes. So again, this is not a hardcore rumor, but I just do want to build on like the fact that we're supposedly getting those new entries to the iPhone family. And I do want to say that specifically if you combine all those things, right? This is where they stop making sense to me, because now you're saying that the iPhone 17 Slim would, well, by the thing that it's an iPhone 17 phone, right, it would launch in late 2025, and then an iPhone 18 series would now also be getting a flip model. Now we are at 5 models, and that slim model was already a replacement for a plus. So technically, while yes, the lineup didn't increase in size, it got a little bit more complicated, because I would argue that the Plus makes a lot more sense in the lineup than the Slim that we have just discussed. But now we come into the question of a foldable, and that foldable, if you actually think about it, it would have similar benefits to what the Slim is trying to accomplish, right? The Slim is trying to be thin and light. For what purpose? Well, it is to be more portable. And the foldable would have, by definition, even if it's still slightly heavy or whatever, be the most portable iPhone since like 3.5-inch iPhones. In fact, it could have an external screen that is roughly 3.5 to 4 inches, as we see from devices like the Galaxy Z Flip and devices like the Motorola Razr, right? So that already is putting into question if those rumors can actually coexist. Could prototypes of both a slim and a foldable coexist? Of course they could. Could actually 2 models that both try to go for thinness, but because of how they're built, would actually be more expensive than the Pros? And by the way, one favors portability through slimness, one favors portability through like having its form factor. So again, that already makes no sense to me. But okay, let's take it as it is from Digitimes, supposedly coming in 2026. Apple would be introducing their first foldable iPhone. It's very likely to be using the same kind of underlying OLED technologies that Samsung and other like Android foldable vendors have introduced over the years, with things like ultra thin glass. Who knows if Apple could come up with something revolutionary that like reduces the crease that we see here, that might increase durability, because foldable are kind of like very much known to not match the durability or like the water and dust protection of a regular smartphone. They are getting better now, but they're still vastly inferior to a phone that doesn't rely on the hinge. But supposedly, yes. 2026, so that's when we would be getting the iPhone 18 family. Apple would be introducing a foldable device based on a panel supply contract with Samsung display. Basically, supposedly there's like a contract going on. It should be important to say that the Apple is also rumored to have like foldable tablets that basically become like laptops once you unfold them. And those things were, I believe, also kind of rumored by Mark Gurman to be coming before Apple introduces a foldable phone. So this contract rumor might actually be correct, but it might not apply to an iPhone flip. Maybe Digitimes just combined this specific like piece of information that they got with info about like a flip prototype being built, but who knows? It is set to include a top-down folding design, so like the Galaxy Flip, not the Galaxy Fold, which I have said for years is the way better form factor. I will get into that shortly as well. It will carry dimensions similar to existing iPhone models, presumably when unfolded. And this is where we get again to the discussion of like, why would you have an iPhone Slim in the family when you have the foldable? If anything, just try to sell as many 6.1-inch iPhones. Hell, if at some point they don't sell, give the base iPhone 6.3 inches to what you're already doing on the Pros. So the supply already exists. It wouldn't cost that much more. Would that many more people jump on board for a 6.5 or a 6.7-inch device? I already don't know. I certainly don't think so if those models cost more than the Pro Max. But maybe, just maybe, for foldable, just for like the sake of, well, it folds, people would consider that, right? Like a 6.7, maybe 6.9-inch display, similar to a Pro Max, but of course it gets much more compact once you fold it up. I don't need to sell you on the pitch of a regular foldable at this point. We've had like 6 generations by now from Samsung, but having both of them in the lineup makes no sense to me. That's one. Second is, of course, the pricing. As we know, of course, Samsung foldables are more expensive than their regular counterparts. Like the Flip is already more expensive than like the regular Galaxy S24. It's kind of the same price as the Galaxy S24 Plus, but that one is superior in basically every way technologically. So that would be a very, very unfair comparison. And then, of course, the Fold is $1,900. And at $1,900, it of course becomes a very, very different discussion from basically any phone on the market anyway. But yes, it is more expensive than the Galaxy S24 Ultra. So it very likely, even if Apple tried to almost match Pro Max specifications, again, I will outline why that won't even be possible. You would probably see it be like $2,000. Well, no, this is the Flip. It would probably be like $1,500. And Drama Llama, I haven't seen you in the chat, brother, for a while. Welcome. Saying, after the Vision Pro and iPads with M4, I wouldn't be surprised to see a foldable iPhone. It's time for Tim Cook to make a bold move like Biden. Oh, brother, don't bring that up. I have so many thoughts on that. And I don't want to make this a political stream. My issue with this thought is, and I know it's very close to you, as of course the llama who's focused on drama. Bold moves don't mean anything if they don't actually connect with customers, right? Like, what has Apple done on the iPhone side beyond the iPhone 10 that is really bold, but has it ever hurt the iPhone? And the question is like, what does, like, and even before the iPhone 10, right? A lot of people say like, well, innovation has like dried up. But what move was that bold before the, like, maybe the iPhone 4 redesign? But again, 3.5-inch screen, one camera, right? It's not like Apple made those massive jumps every year. They had to get good. because first, right, they need to go from like 3 megapixel camera to 5 megapixel camera to 8 megapixel cameras. They needed to like introduce biometrics. Those were all nice things, but what of that was bold? It was just like necessary to keep the excitement going and to have people buy new models. I would argue with continuous camera improvements, screen improvements, battery improvements, cellular connectivity improvements, USB-C, faster charging, faster data transfer, better speakers, better microphones. None of that is bold, quote unquote, but I believe that all of that sells well. It won't sell like any new model. I've argued that on Twitter, that like no individual model will ever become a super cycle that suddenly sells like 20% more models, right? Unless the previous year was for some reason a flop. But like a 10% increase in sales, maybe a 15% increase in sales, that's a super cycle, in my opinion. If you bring the price either down or you add more value through things like doubling the storage at the same price. Or like giving the iPhone an extra camera or something like that. I don't think that a foldable iPhone is bold in the sense that it fills a fundamental need that people are seeing as being unaddressed. Because like yeah, we all want more portability, but are we willing to pay more for a device like this that has a smaller battery than a Pro Max of the same size because it has to incorporate the hinge? It would very likely has worse cooling because if you think of a processor sitting here, right, let's say Apple goes ultra crazy and they introduce a vapor chamber heatsink that runs from like here to partially here to cover both the battery and the chip. Now that would be again impossible here. You would have to have basically two separate vapor chamber heatsinks. Again, not saying that Apple will be introducing vapor chamber heatsinks anyway, but we see that for example on Samsung where their flip devices are notorious for having the worst cooling in any of their like premium smartphones. Of course, camera, because now you've limited your internal space. They're also worse, and because you need to keep this somewhat thin so that when folded up it doesn't get too thick, this is thinner than a regular smartphone, so you either end up with a way bigger camera bulge or you end up with worse cameras on the back. And guess what? Most people don't want to pay more money for a device with worse cameras. I know Mr. Mobile will like contextualize those choices, and to a degree he will excuse them, and he's like a big foldable fan, but I don't think that he speaks for the majority of customers. So in that case I would have to add to some drama, my precious drama llama, and actually disagree with you. But thank you for your support. And speaking of support, thank you anybody who's supporting this channel by just watching the videos, subscribing, liking the content, sharing it out to anybody who think might enjoy it. I hope you guys are liking, of course, the live chat. Ben Vinny is joining, saying iPhone 10 and 10s only sell like hotcakes because they were more revolutionary than previous years. iPhone 10s sold bad. At first, Apple had to introduce specific price reductions in China so that the 10s family actually sold well. The iPhone 10 ate up demand for like basically in before the 10s even came out. Yes, it was redesigned in all aspects. I don't see that happening. We won't be getting an iPhone 10 redesigned until we get to like holographic technology. That's just the nature of it. Even foldables are not as game-changing for the regular guy as the iPhone 10 was. Maybe an all-screen iPhone without dynamic island. That's also not a big change. Like supposedly iPhone 17 is when we are likely getting a smaller dynamic island. That was kind of rumored by Ross Young. But even if you have it, right, part of the fun of the dynamic island is already its dynamic nature, right? It's in the name. It gets smaller, it gets larger. So what? It would be at its smallest, half as small as this one. That's cool if you're watching like an all-screen movie, but if you're scrolling through a website where this is the status bar. This is where content already doesn't exist. And Drama Llama being here super charitable with a €5 donation even before I asked for it, because I was just going to say, if you want to support me directly, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker. And if you want to support me in the long term, you can become a channel member or a supporter on Patreon. Drama Llama showing incredible support with $5. Guys, if you want to do it like Drama Llama, you now can see how it's done. Thank you so much, brother. Adding some spice, but also adding it with something nice. So that's very, very much appreciated. So where else can I destroy a flip, right? We've already talked about a hinge makes it less durable, right? But that's not only that. It, of course, introduces a visual crease here. So Apple would now have to sell their customers on the idea of getting a product with worse image quality on its screen than even like Plus models from the past. Sure, it would have 120 hertz and ProMotion and variable refresh rate and high brightness and everything else. But now you have this disgusting crease in the middle, and it doesn't even add anything, because with a Fold, you have to think, well, the crease is here, but you basically get to double the screen size because of that. You also get to a nice wide more square aspect ratio, but the wide gets wider here. And that's cool and all, and that adds actual usability, but this adds portability, and portability is something that some people actually don't care as much about these days. Benvini saying, how do I how do I become a channel member? That is a problem in the YouTube app for several regions, unfortunately. If you really want to become a YouTube channel member, you should like basically find my channel in the browser and basically subscribe through there. I believe it works worldwide, but it doesn't work everywhere in the world through the YouTube app. I think especially in Europe, it just absolutely doesn't. I've had like a guy, like one of our supporters on YouTube, actually like asked me like, why can I not support you? And I had no idea. And I even contacted Renee Ritchie, who is the YouTube liaison for creators. And yeah, he said that sometimes in some regions it just doesn't work through the YouTube app. So Benveni, if you really want to do it, I highly encourage you to, of course, try it out. But you can also, like, I know that you support me, right? If you drop like a little super chat, I'll shout you out. I'll very, very much appreciate that. And you will have far less headache. And it will be much more enjoyable, right, as a thing right inside the stream to just see a little bit of money trickle in. Basically, guys, because Drama Llama already mentioned politics here, treat me today like Kamala Harris. You know what? If you want to support me and our fight for democracy, leave a super chat right here and there. Kamala Harris, made $103 million in 24 hours for the Act Blue campaign. I think we can match it today in a few hours. I think we can do it. Just freaking kidding. But like, yeah. So Benveni, don't bother too much if you cannot subscribe, if you cannot become a channel member, because the YouTube app unfortunately is limited because of, well, Apple wants to collect their 30% commission, and then there's also some European rules. If that doesn't work, I believe that super chats and super stickers work basically from everywhere, and I believe it's the same kind of cut, so I see the absolute same support. But thank you. And Benveni with a £5 donation. So I was babbling about how you guys can support me, so now you do it. Thank you so much. We don't actually have too many people watching. I know that my channel engagement has been pretty bad actually in recent times because I've been streaming very, very irregularly. But thank you guys. This is exactly the kind of support that keeps me going. Again, it's not about the money. It's about knowing that you guys are here, that you're enjoying yourself, and that you're basically saying with with your chest right now that you're willing to give something back because you are getting something from me and you're enjoying it. And that to me means the world. This is why I keep doing that next to a very, very busy schedule with everything else in my life. This is why I even do that when I don't feel too well. So thank you so much. I'll try to be more regular, I guess, because if you guys are looking that much forward to it, to give such generous donations, I of course, and you're also like sending super stickers, not even super chats. Like you aren't even asking me to read a specific message, so that means the world to me. Thank you. But yeah, now to anyone who's watching this video either live or after it's been streamed, now you can see how you can leave some donations to me. It works really well. Let's beat Kamala Harris when it comes to the amount of money collected. By the way, guys, I'm a huge Kamala Harris fan. I would send her money if I wasn't in Europe, if it wasn't completely illegal. So those jokes are entirely to her benefit, not to attack her. So basically, we're talking about a rumor that is based on a contract between Apple and Samsung Display. And Ben, we need another £1 donation. Bro, you're just keeping me busy here, thanking you. You want a rim job or what? Oh my God, I just broke my rule about being family friendly. But and saying my channel is the best, well, thank you. I don't want to say you specifically are the best supporter. Right now you are, once you consider the money ratio between pounds and euros. So keep up, Drama Llama. But no, you guys are the best, because one thing that I've also seen here on this channel is that we can talk about stuff, and like today we can shit on Apple when it feels like the right thing to do, right? And sometimes we will just kiss Tim Apple's ass because it's so deliciously apple flavored. But yes, I will talk smack about Samsung when they blindly copy Apple's designs without any attempt at something original. But I will also give them like give them like the thumbs up for things like they do with screens and memory and storage. And by the way, we've had a lot of people even over time ask here, like, which phone should I get? Like, I have only so much money, or I come from this and that region, everyone has Androids. And I'm like, yeah, then you should consider an Android. I am not like an iPhone eugenicist. I don't believe that we are superior here. I just believe that I enjoy iPhone the most. I enjoy Apple's ecosystem the most. And I try to give guys with similar interest, or just in general tech interest, some of my impressions back. And if you guys feel like supporting it, you guys are showing you are more than willing to do so. Mwah! You're absolutely amazing. So it's not just my channel that is the best, though I know that's already debatable, but you guys are the best. Thank you so much. There have been rumors off and on in the past about Apple developing a foldable iPhone. Now we go back to my original point where iPhone foldables have been away by 2 or 3 years for now half a decade. So just because this rumor now came up, don't get seduced to thinking, well, now it's happening because it's a new rumor. We've had like basically like a refreshed rumor time and time again here with iPhones, things like that. Well, with iPhone foldables, but we've also had them now for iPad foldables. Like we've had rumors about an iPad mini that becomes a 13-inch iPad. We've had rumors about 10 or 12-inch iPads that become like 17-inch laptops. So we've had so many rumors by now. One of them is like an M5 based MacBook with a foldable display and a foldable iPad. So yeah, kudos to 9to5Mac for actually like bringing up those things, because I believe I doubt that all those things would actually exist, right? I've already said why I believe it's very unlikely that a foldable that has basically like the form factor of a Pro Max or a Plus, but with in some ways worse tech, could coexist with a Slim. So that, in my opinion, it wouldn't make sense why you would introduce a Slim the year prior and then a Flip the next year. In my opinion, at that point, you would just leave out the 17 Plus, try to sell as many brand new regular 17 models, and then the next year you just introduce the flip. That just makes way more sense from like an economical perspective on how many, like, you want more people to buy your shit, right? And but you also want your engineers to actually work on something that is sustainable, that you can keep selling and marketing in the future. That's an upfront investment to create like new production processes, like potentially hire new engineers who are familiar with a new technology like Samsung's foldable specific screens. So that already does make sense to me. And that's just two iPhones, one of them very adjacent to the Plus models we've already had for years. Once you ask me about the existence of foldable Macs and foldable iPads and how it could all coexist together, this is where I would say, and what I've always said before, Apple is a huge company with almost unlimited resources. If Apple can prototype something, they will most likely do it. The fact that sometimes, or most of the time, like Apple's famous saying, there are 1,000 no's for every yes. The fact that some prototypes become real does not actually make it more likely that other prototypes will. In fact, it makes it less likely just from the theory of probability, right? Because if 1,000 no's result in one yes, well, if you have already one yes, now you need to hit another 1,000 no's before you get to the next yes. So this idea that Apple would introduce so many foldables almost simultaneously, all while we don't actually see the core issues of foldables being solved, which is stuff like durability, like worse image quality because of the crease and stuff like that. That is where it gets slightly unbelievable to me. And Daniel, you've said before that like basically some of those rumors are clickbait. Well, there are a lot of rumors, right? That is kind of my point as a content creator and my problem as a content creator. It's also a help for me as a content creator, to be honest. But of course, it gives me more to talk about. But I need to be as nuanced and basically as over the top in a way as I am right now, in like how many words I'm putting on screen right now, is to just give you the understanding that, guys, you are not getting an iPhone Slim, an iPhone Flip, a MacBook 5 M5 with a foldable screen, and a foldable iPad as well. You might get one of those things, maybe even two of those things, but you are definitely not getting all 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever many rumors we have of like spin-off devices, devices of slightly different size, devices utilizing slightly new technology. That's just not how it works. Ben Winnie saying those leaks are believing too much in Apple. Apple wouldn't make a big change, 2 new models in 2. Exactly. The problem is like, even to like, Apple is only human, right? Apple is a giant international conglomerate, but let's just put it at like Apple is only human because it has only humans working for it. Having 2 like somewhat new models that you also need to market as new models, right, is already complicated. But now having a model that is as complicated and already has a slightly sour taste in the mouth of many people, like a foldable, why would you bother yourself with having the burden of having a slim model the year prior if you now have to either find a way to sell both of them, which to me makes the most sense, or more likely to discontinue the slim and put the flip in its place? And that to me is where it gets like very weird and where I just don't see it happening. If you ask me which one is more likely, I think that the slim model that is significantly cheaper than like the rumored $1,300 is probably happening. It would be like a better plus. And we know from Apple that Apple is not afraid to have like a, for example, a 15-inch MacBook Air that exists close to a 14-inch MacBook Pro, and then a 16-inch MacBook Pro on top of all that, right? And in theory, you can even have like configurations of the 15-inch MacBook Air that are more expensive than the 14-inch MacBook Pro. So while that is not a perfect comparison, I could see that happening. Now, when it comes to foldables, my question is, how likely is it that Apple like trusts foldables as a form factor enough to actually invest in them? I know, of course, that they will be building prototypes and maybe have some long-term plans. Are those plans actually 2 to 3 years away, as we always discuss every new year? That I couldn't tell you, to be perfectly honest. I don't want to like entirely discount it. I do not trust Digitimes too much, so I'm not telling you definitely to trust it. But yeah, it's not the best rumor, to say it lightly. However, one rumor that I do definitely believe, it depends on the details, of course, but I definitely do believe and basically know that we will be getting an iPhone SE 4. And I also know that an upcoming iPhone SE, for one, would need to switch from Lightning to USB-C, both for the sakes of the entire family, of course, switching to USB-C in general, but also because the iPhone, because the European Union will make it mandatory for a device that is introduced either late this year or sometime next year to be built on USB-C. So it makes perfect sense. Now, this comes from Ice Universe, who is a Twitter leaker who also does like Samsung leaks. I would call him somewhat reliable. Not sure though. We've definitely had some misses from Twitter leakers too. So again, take it with a grain of salt, some of the specifics. However, there will be, of course, a new iPhone SE. Apple cannot perpetually sell us on a 4.7-inch LCD screen with a home button, with an outdated camera, an older and older getting chip, even though it's still a decent A15 processor. So let's get into what we actually believe the iPhone SE 4 to be. Now, for a while, we've talked about the fact that it would actually be a pretty huge redesign that would be in most ways like an iPhone 14. There's been some updates to that. Of course, it would get USB-C with a new OLED 6.1-inch screen, and that OLED screen would also have, of course, Face ID built in. So unlike what we have on the iPad Air, where we go cheaper by going to Touch ID rather than Face ID, this would be getting Face ID. Daniel, you're saying Ice Universe isn't the leaker himself. He posts everything he sees. Yeah, that's true. He copies stuff from like Weibo, which is like a Chinese website, I believe. A lot of this is stuff that was like regurgitated through stuff like Weibo. But I do believe that it's... how do I say it? They're some way connected to those leaks. At least that's how I always perceive it, because there's a reason why those are specific accounts that are very, very quickly to catch on those leaks. I believe that they either create like burner accounts on Weibo to then basically like not get caught as the leakers themselves, but then their more public-facing persona on stuff like Twitter is basically that of like a rehasher, right? At least that's how I would do it, right? I would never claim to have like, for example, I would never do what John Prosser from Front Page Tech did and basically say, oh, I myself am the leaker here. I have connections to somewhere at Apple. I would basically say something like, oh, I know someone or something like that, because now Apple will come for you, MFR, and you definitely don't want that. At least that's kind of my perception. Could be completely wrong. They could just be very get it, aggregating stuff from Weibo and stuff like that. Like Shrimp Apple Pro sometimes does that. Sometimes I'll just call it they have like more original stuff. So who knows? Oh, I hate it when Coke gets warm. Jesus. And it was like ice cold before, so in an hour it basically warmed up like crazy. So now you know why I sweat. So again, Face ID, USB-C. Of course, that's a huge upgrade over home buttons and Lightning ports. 6.06 inches is advertised by Apple to be 6.1 inches. We've had different leaks about the processor. Specifically, we've talked about for a while, like an iPhone, like an A17 chip, like one that would, I apologize, guys, would like drop the Pro from the A17, um and well, makes sense basically, right? Like disable a GPU core, something like that, call it A17 versus A17 Pro. And now it seems like we are basically moving over to A18 rumors, because it seems like Apple is very quickly trying to move all their production, chip production, from N3B to TSMC's newer N3E node. And that is what A18 will be built on. And A18 will be coming to the iPhone 16 family, supposedly as a regular A18 in the regular iPhone 16 and 16 Plus, and as an A18 Pro inside the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. Benveni is saying, do you believe Apple Intelligence will come to the iPhone SE4? Well, there are a couple of things here to consider. The current iPhone SE is built on the A15 chip, and it has 4 gigabytes of memory, right? So there's no way in hell for it to run Apple Intelligence already. If prior to the Apple Intelligence announcement, you told me it would have 8 gigabytes of memory, I would have told you why, right? It's a just for the audience that Apple is targeting, especially considering that this is very likely a single camera device, right? I would have asked, like, okay, 8 gigabytes, of course, that's cool, but why would Apple like increase production cost for it if they don't really need to, right? The people buying the SE4 likely wouldn't be looking at the amounts of memory. Now, it is either running an A17 or an A18 chip. So from a processor perspective, it can already, just from a processing amount that is put on the Apple Neural Engine, it can handle Apple Intelligence. So then the question is, does it get the appropriate amount of memory to do so? Daniel, you're saying A18 is cheaper to manufacture than A17 Pro. True. Well, no, not necessarily. We don't actually know how big A18 is versus A18 like Pro, if like how much is disabled on the A18 versus the A18 Pro. We don't know if like Apple uses faster memory across A18 and A18 Pro, and then we don't know how all of that compares to the A17 Pro, because we don't have the details yet on the A18 family. The reason why it could be cheap to still use to use A17 chips, and that's why I'm specifically saying A17 chips, we would be looking at not fully functioning A17 Pros, right? So those would not be quite the same chip as what is coming into the 15 Pro, and because there is no other device right now that houses an A17 chip, it would be cheap, because now you have defect A17 Pro chips that don't qualify to be iPhone 17 A17 Pros, A17 Pro chips, not iPhone 17 Pro, but they do qualify it as being a bin down A17 version, and that still would have the same neural engine. So to Ben Vinny's question, it would still, from a processor perspective, even if like 1/6 of its GPU was disabled, it would still handle Apple Intelligence through the neural engine. And then the question is, would it be 6 gigabytes of memory, similar to what we have right now on like the iPhone 15 and what we had on the 16 family in general, what we had on the 14 family in general? Or would it be 8 gigabytes, similar to what we have on the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, and what we're rumored to get across the iPhone 16 family? And honestly, I do want to go back in time a little and talk about the original iPhone SE, the one that was introduced a few months, basically half a year after the iPhone 6S, and it had the same A9 chip, right? It had the same 2 gigabytes of memory, of the same speeds memory, and that worked, right? Now, was it as well cool? Probably not, because it was a 4-inch device, but Benveniste, to your question, I believe it could. And to be honest, the only thing that I worry about when it comes to its support for Apple Intelligent is when would it launch, right? And people are saying it would launch in like May of 2025. I don't know. To be honest, if you told me that the iPhone SE would launch simultaneously with the iPhone 17, right? Basically late 2025, maybe even early 2026, I would without a doubt tell you it will have 8 gigabytes of memory, because those other phones will have like significantly better cameras, significantly better screens, right? You will have like LTPO across the board and things like that. But next to the 16 lineup, right? Because that would be coming out half a year after the 16 lineup. Well, the regular 16 would still have 8 gigs of memory, but it wouldn't have ProMotion. So the technical differences here wouldn't be too large. It would be an A18 chip, right? If an A18 Pro exists, I definitely don't think it's coming to the SE. And if the iPhone 17 family gets A19 chips, then it doesn't really matter what the SE gets. Even if it's an A18 Pro or a regular A18, doesn't matter. It would still be inferior to the A19 family in the iPhone 17. Now, when we are talking about it, however, launching basically after the so quickly after the 16 family for so much less money. Now at 549, could I see it having 8 gigs of memory just for the fun of it? Maybe Apple like tricks us and gives it 64 gigabytes of base storage and then charges $50 more to make it a $600 phone with 128 gigabytes. Then I could see it if it's actually $499, and especially if it comes with 128 gigabytes of base storage. It's hard for me to imagine. However, the one thing that I do want to point out is, Benvenue is saying basically software locks. Well, no, if it doesn't have the amount of memory, it's not a software lock, right? That's one thing. But I could see it. It's hard to explain. It has to do with marketing. And I do want to be detailed with you guys because you're so generous. You're such good supporters. You're such awesome viewers and commenters. I do want to not just say something. I actually want to like explain to you what I mean. There is a problem with marketing whenever you introduce specific features and to make them like, oh, this is a new generation of capabilities and they are enabled by our latest chip, right? That works pretty cool whenever you're introducing it, right? And then the year after, it's natural for a new chip to have the same capabilities or even more. The issue comes if Apple says Apple Intelligence works with A17 and up, excluding the iPhone SE. They would have to basically create an asterisk on that website. And it doesn't work on iPhone SE, even though it technically has a newer chip. People would be talking, like most people wouldn't understand that RAM difference. People would be talking about software locks, artificial like scarcity, artificial like limits. And even if Apple did that RAM limit, right, 6 versus 8 gigabytes, people would be telling Apple, well, how expensive was that really? Apple, come on, you couldn't give us 2 extra gigabytes of memory? This is different from like Stage Manager, because Stage Manager was like very much geared towards pros, right? It doesn't make sense on an iPad mini, for example. And on the non-M series iPad Air, before, or even like the 10th generation iPad with an A14 chip or whatever, you can argue it's so much cheaper. It really doesn't like make sense to ask for that. But this would be an over $500 device with taxes, especially, and especially in higher storage configurations. I believe it just would look weird on Apple, because when you look at actually Apple Intelligence, right, and at Apple's pitch here, how did Apple pitch it, right? Apple Intelligence, iPhone, iOS 18 preview. Oh, they have actually a preview for Apple Intelligence specifically. They called it AI for the rest of us. And I honestly think it could hurt them if a full year after the introduction of the, um, yeah, well, let's say it comes out in May. It would be a year after the WWDC where Apple Intelligence was introduced. It's half a year after the introduction of smartphones that are specifically built for it. I believe that it could potentially hurt Apple. Now, again, Apple probably doesn't care about it that much if it helps them sell more expensive iPhones, but sometimes your image actually matters, even if it makes you drop like your revenue by half a percentage or whatever. That is something that you accept so that you can stay more consistent, more reliable, more believable to your audience. So my speculation is, and I'll just go on out on a limb here. I'll say that yes, iPhone SE will support Apple Intelligence, and that will be its headline feature. I believe it will have like a 48 megapixel camera, right? And Apple will advertise that camera as having basically two zoom ranges, right? Basically something like 24 millimeters and then 12 millimeters, once you consider that you can zoom in 2x digitally and still get a nice 12 megapixel camera. And that will be cool. And then Apple will say it has a fast processor. No Android phone can respond as quickly or whatever. It has a bright, large screen, especially in comparison to like the previous LCD. It has USB-C, all those interesting things. And it has Apple Intelligence. And I think that this device with an A18 chip could be sold for 2 or 3 years for basically the same price. And then on top of that, the family of iPhones would actually keep changing. Every iPhone would go LTPO. Every iPhone would go 2, 3, maybe potentially some point 4 cameras. Every iPhone would get like a new generation of modems, cellular Wi-Fi connectivity, faster USB-C transfers, brighter screens, ProMotion screens, higher refresh rate screens. And now the fact that it has Apple Intelligence won't cannibalize the other iPhones because those iPhones are so much better in so many other ways. Benwini, I think if this iPhone SE 4 leak is true, with all those new features, it would make much sense to release 2 months before or after the iPhone. Yes, I agree. Well, you're saying like I said, yeah, but we're basically in agreement. I think it could make sense even still before the iPhone 17 family, like a WWDC announcement in next year. And I know technically WWDC isn't even that far away from like that March or May timeline, but like May I could see happening. May is not too far off from September, but like March just looks weird because it's so it's closer to those previous gen models than it is to the upcoming next gen models. So I apologize for blabbering. It's just you guys were so generous with your support. I just didn't want to say something and let you guys try to like decipher what I said. I really wanted to make you understand what I thought. Now, the new rumor here is that the iPhone SE would supposedly have the same chassis as the iPhone 16. By the way, guys, I hope you know I do actually prepare for these videos. This is why I cannot do the streams every day. I'm not reading the article. I've actually read like multiple articles about rumors about the iPhone SE. So if you ever think that I'm a completely lazy streamer who just sits his fat ass in the chair and reads out random articles that I found 5 minutes before the event, that is absolutely not true. I try to be prepared. I try to be informed. I try to earn my keep here. I try to earn your respect. I try to earn your view time and sometimes your donations like we saw today. And speaking of donations, if you want to support this channel, consider subscribing, liking the videos, sharing them out to anybody who you think might enjoy it, commenting. We have a very lively live chat today. I enjoyed that very, very much. Of course, beyond that, you can be a super generous direct supporter like Ben Vini and Drama Llama today, and send super chats or super stickers. If you want to support this channel directly in the long term, you can become a channel member on YouTube. Shout out go to Angelica and Max Maximus, who are MarkTech Pro Max tier followers over there. And you can also go to my Patreon. Shout out goes to Louis Gold, who is our MarkTech Pro Max supporter over there. Of course, they're cheaper tiers, so if you feel like spending a little bit less and still supporting me consistently, that's all fine and good. And if you want to, of course, contact me in general, there's also a free tier on Patreon, so you can send a message there, or more likely, just follow me on Twitter, or on Threads. I'm trying to get back into Threads a little because Twitter has become an absolute nightmare now that Elon is just blatantly right-wing. But yeah, so you can contact me there like that, or support me here the way I just described. So that's the iPhone SE. This is the one that is 100% happening as a device, right? Whether or not it would have an actual iPhone 16 chassis, and some are rumored that it wouldn't get like a notch similar to an iPhone 14, but that it would basically get in many ways like the screen and like build of the iPhone 16, right? So a non-ProMotion, non-LTPO screen, but still a screen with dynamic island, pretty slim bezels, and of course, basically the exact dimensions. Just on the Mac, you would have like a singular camera cutout. You can take those rumors as you will. Of course, in my opinion, those specifics would like push the pricing upwards, but then Apple can easily compensate for some of the price increases with things like increasing base storage. So I believe that the iPhone SE4 is happening. Ben Vini just said it beautifully. It would make sense the most to introduce it close to the iPhone 17, but Apple also needs to consider the European Union, and they definitely need like a successor to the current SE that is based on USB-C. So maybe that will push them to release it a little earlier. In that case, it might get an A17 rather than an A18 chip. Who knows? Basically, what I'm trying to say, the phone definitely exists. Unlike what we've talked about with the Slim and the Flip, I definitely believe this exists. However, in what exact shape it will actually launch, that remains to be seen. Now, the last one is actually something that I didn't get to prepare that much because it's a rumor just from today. It's coming from The Information, the same guys who have talked about like some of the other rumors, like the Slim. And it's basically all about and the Foldable. I believe, yeah. What's The Information like reporting on the Slim or the Foldo or the Flip? I always mix that up. Moves forward. Oh yeah, okay. They were the ones to report on the Flip, so not on the Slim. And they also brought up. Wait, they closed those things? Yeah. Oh, there are new betas right now. By the way, guys, if you are like crazy like me and you are like trying out iOS betas and macOS betas, apparently there are new ones. Well, wait, no, new Vision, new WatchOS, tvOS, and VisionOS betas and macOS betas, but I don't see. Oh yeah, iOS 18 beta 4 is out, so I'll be installing that right after this stream. But no, there was here. There it is. Man, I'm sweating like crazy at this point. It's so freaking humid. So this is something that I haven't yet had a full chance to read through. Um, Basically, this is about Apple's continuous camera improvements. Now, we already do know that the iPhone 16 family would have like a redesigned internals, stuff that would allow it to have replaceable batteries. Supposedly, we are getting like 3D touch based buttons, whether that applies to all buttons or maybe just the new capture button. We don't know, but the capture button is definitely something that we see as something new new and as something very much camera focused coming this year. So that's quite cool. But then looking forward, Apple is investing in camera improvements for iPhone 17 and beyond. And one of those things could allow you to change the aperture size, not based on software or anything, but with an actual mechanical system. Um, Benvini, you didn't know about the betas and you will update now. Well, you can update right after the stream, brother. Or you can set like a secondary device to update, not like the device you're actually watching this video on. Yeah, I wasn't expecting iOS today. I believe like Zolo, from Zolo Tech, the guy who said that like based on Apple's last year like releases of like iOS 17, iOS 18 beta 4 should be launching next week, not this week. So that's quite a good surprise in my opinion. But continuing with this rumor, the aperture, which is the opening of the lens through which light enters, had been fixed as opposed to variable. For example, one of the first devices to introduce variable apertures in a mechanical sense was actually the Galaxy S9. It could go to like an actually less open aperture for very bright scenarios, because there you don't need that much light, but a change in aperture can change things like focus a little bit and depth of field. And genuinely like a less wide aperture is like more beneficial to those factors. That required trade-offs between the amount of light the lens could capture and an object's depth of field. That's what I said. The distance between the scene's nearest and farthest objects that appear sharp and in focus. A variable aperture will allow iPhone photographers to create a natural depth of field effect, also known as bokeh, in which the subject stays in focus while the background is blurred. Now, what is interesting to me is there are two things that you can basically vary in a camera in a mechanical way that has either never come to smartphones or been only limited to like small production, or has stayed niche, or manufacturers abandoned it. Now, one of those things is a mechanical aperture change, right? And we already say that primarily impacts the depth of field. Now, given that we have digital bokeh effects and we do have larger sensors which generally produce better depth of field, I would say aperture has not been as big of a problem. One thing that definitely has impacted us and companies creating smartphones is actually the mechanical ability to change optical zoom. This is why we have 3 cameras on our iPhone Pros, because they have fixed zoom ranges of 12 millimeters, 24 millimeters, and 120 millimeters, I believe. And of course, that's how you get 0.5x, 1x, and 5x on the 15 Pro Max. And now, of course, the mechanics would be incredibly complicated and likely impossible to move from 0.5x to 5x on a smartphone, given the real mechanical constraints. But one rumor, for example, for the upcoming Galaxy S25 or S26 Ultra is that one of those phones might actually introduce a variable zoom for its like 5x camera, so it can be like 5 to 8x, 5 to 10x, actually optical zoom, not digital. And in fact, the smartphone manufacturer who already has that technology, well, for a while LG actually introduced camera modules like that, but they never came to their smartphones because their smartphone business was dead at that point. But Sony, Xperia, optical zoom, I forget the name of the phones, but basically Samsung has, Sony, I apologize, has a real variable zoom inside their telephoto camera. And my dream would be kind of, instead of having 3 or 4 camera lenses in the back, is to have maybe one might be too optimistic, but maybe have 2 one that would allow optical zoom between like zero point 0.5 and like 1.5x, that would have still like the huge main sensor from the regular wide camera, that it would be like a full 1 inch or close to that, and then a slightly smaller camera for with variable zoom as well, but one that maybe goes from 3x optical zoom to 10x optical zoom, and then maybe the sensor could be like 1 by 1.5 inches or something like that, rather than a full 1 inch sensor. And Sony, I apologize why I want to give all that credit to Samsung today. It's definitely a Sony thing, actually has that. And if their website actually loads, then we might actually talk about it. You can see, by the way, that Sony is as crazy as ever with their pricing. At $1,400, you can also see like weird marketing points, like 4K displays on a 6.5-inch form factor. So if you want to ever know why Sony phones don't sell, yeah, that's one of the reasons. And yeah, let's see all the tech specs here. Camera, performance, usability, game, audio, display. 3840 by 1644. What a waste of pixels. But yeah, if you ever have problems with a modern smartphone screens and you think their pixel density is just too low, get a Sony Xperia like flagship with 643 ppi. Unfortunately, these screens are not very bright though. They don't compete with what Samsung and LG are currently putting out. Network, camera, there it is. So we have a triple lens camera, 1 wide, 2 telephoto, 3 ultra wide. And when we look at the optical zoom range, what do they really make it that difficult here to find it? Main camera, brand, Jesus Christ, who creates a website looking like that? Aperture f2.3, 85 millimeters, f2.6 at 105 millimeters, and f2.8 at 125 millimeters. Is for the zoom camera, right? Jesus, Sony, Sony variable zoom Xperia. Guys, I really want to be factually correct here. Now, this is the Xperia 3, so that is a little older at this point. But basically, you can change the optical zoom. You can zoom in slightly more. That's the gist of it. I just want to give you exact specs for it. If any of you can find it very quickly, or have they given up on that specification? Flagship zooms in on photography nerds. It ships with an upgraded telephoto camera, AR autofocus. Okay. It has 3 cameras on the back, a 24mm main camera, that's basically kind of the same focus as the iPhone, a 16mm ultra wide, that's actually a little less wide than the iPhone. Oh yes, and this is where we have its zoom camera that goes from around 3.5x to 7.1x. So, and I believe that its aperture changes dynamically with the zoom that you do. Don't hold me to that. I'm not sure about that, but I also don't want to do quite too much research on it. But yeah, when we are talking about variable like adjustment, like not having to switch from one dedicated camera to the next, this is where we actually get into some really cool territory. And this is the one technology where I think that Apple would be really, really well off going to Sony, buying the best sensors from them in general, but then also saying, bro, we want your camera modules to do like the zoom trick. Maybe we can work with you to like slightly change the range to maybe do it like 3x to 8x or something like that. But we really want that. That would be really cool. Can we get that? And basically, Samsung is rumored to be introducing that kind of tech on their phones. Apple has been talked about introducing stuff now like variable aperture. But to me, the biggest focus, the biggest benefit would come from something like variable zoom. Especially since there is no zoom effectively, like real zoom, between 1x and 5x. You can argue that the iPhone has like 2x because like you can go on to 12 megapixels inside of a 48 megapixel sensor. That's slightly too optimistic in my opinion. Generally the quality still is not fantastic like an optical zoom would. So yeah, if we actually had 3x to like 7x, or even if it were like slightly smaller range, right, like 3x to 6x, so we could get like our 3x zoom back, which I still think is an extremely usable zoom range. It just so happens that, for example, Samsung gives its 3x zoom such a bad sensor and such bad optics that it makes more sense to just zoom in on the main sensor than use that camera. So why they even bother with putting like a 3x zoom on their devices, I have no idea. But then all the new effort is more like 5x zoom and beyond. And I think that would be a fantastic compromise. Well, wouldn't even be a compromise. It would be the best of both worlds of giving us that extremely usable zoom of like 3-4x, but also in more niche scenarios, it could give you those extremely fun zooms like 6, 7, or 8x zooms. So that is kind of where I would like to see it. Again, I love the 5x zoom on my iPhone. I wish it was 4x, but with slightly better quality, right? Maybe a wider aperture to let in more light, and maybe a slightly larger sensor. So that would still allow me to zoom in a little bit more. But 5x it is, and it is a good 5x with really incredibly stable, good stabilization, things like that. But this is the kind of thing I would love to see Apple introduce. Now, that thing will definitely not be coming to the iPhone SE 4, most likely not to any Apple Foldable, and also very likely not to the Slim, unless Apple decides to pull something weird and create like an artificial selling point for the Slim by making a brand new camera technology exclusive to it. But that's neither here nor there. Those are the things we've talked about today. New iPhone camera stuff to look forward to, new iPhone models ranging from the cheap to the weird with the iPhone SE 4, the Slim, the Flip. We will, of course, keep talking about on the channel things like the Snapdragon X Elite and how it actually performs in benchmarks because for some reason it's still hard to get your hands on like really comprehensive testing. I think YouTubers are very, very comfortable with just getting sponsored videos from Qualcomm that don't encourage them to do like very deep dives. But let's see if, what we can do over time. Of course, beyond that, iPhone 16 is not too far off. Unfortunately, in September, I'll be pretty busy. I'll be able to still do my stuff, but maybe I'll not be able to actually like react live to the next iPhone event. So I just wanted to warn you about that. And beyond that, that's it for today. I'll try to add timestamp in a reasonable manner. I want to again tell you guys how incredible you have been as supporters, chatters, viewers, and everything else in between. Of course, thank you for the generous donations today. And to anybody who is watching and enjoying, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video or any other video that you might enjoy from me. Sharing them out to people who you think might enjoy them. And of course, you, comment on my videos while they're live. That encourages us to have a lively live chat, as I call it. But also comment once a video has just been uploaded as a regular video, because that helps tremendously with the algorithm. Now, if you want to support me directly, you saw today how well it works with Drama Lama and Ben Winnie leaving generous super chats. But you can also become a channel member. member and support me in the long term like that, or you can become a supporter on Patreon, which of course is also long term, and there are different tiers there. Ben Veneer saying September will be a very good month to see your thoughts on the exclusive Apple Intelligence 16 Pro features. Let's see if there will be any exclusive stuff based on the A18. I would assume that if there's anything exclusive, it would have to do something with the camera, right? We're getting a larger main sensor, supposedly some slightly updated optics. Maybe Apple will use that to just feed more data, and then the neural engine can pull off some stuff that we don't know yet. But yeah, I'll cover it all. And of course, if you guys keep being as generous as you have been today, then it's even more fun and it's even more beneficial to me, and it encourages me to just cover more stuff for longer and just chat with you and enjoy it all. So I'll now try to actually get some fresh air because I'm absolutely cooking here, getting cooked myself to be more precise. As always, thank you so much for your support, and let me know what you would like to see me cover next. And I'll see you next time. This is Mark Tech tuning out.